Welcome back. Today we're going over the exciting story of Russian superpowers. Specifically, the superpowers wielded by a former peasant by the name of Grigory Rasputin, otherwise known to the world as Rasputin. Rasputin was born a peasant in the remote reaches of Siberia, way out in no man's land. He was born the son of peasant husband and wife who had 7 other children, none of which survived. Poor little Rasputin grew up, and he wasn't even taught how to read or to write as a young man. He got married at the young age of 18, and he had 7 children of his own, only 3 of which survived to adulthood. But Rasputin, at the age of 28, got a wandering bug, and he began to wander about. During his wanderings, he had a spiritual experience. He wandered off to a faraway monastery where he spent several months learning from the monks, and many believe he learned to read and write at the monastery as well. He came back and complained that there was a bit of buggery going on between the monks, and that caused him to turn away. But when he came back, he was a changed man. He'd become a vegetarian. He'd begun to read, and he did many other things that were strange to the people that knew him as friends and family. Rasputin then began a career wandering around, going on a series of pilgrimages to Orthodox monasteries around the land. Eventually, these wanderings and pilgrimages led him to St. Petersburg. He had been accused back in Siberia of having some strange orgies, sexual orgies with female acolytes. But these were never substantiated, and historians dispute their veracity. That's a claim that would come to plague him throughout the rest of his career and his life. Tales of rape and sexual exploitation of his followers. But there's a lot of myth behind these rumors. Very hard to get validated. However, in 1905, Rasputin wandered all the way to St. Petersburg from Siberia. Take a look at a map sometime to see what an incredible journey that must have been. Whether he traveled by foot or by train, no one knows, but he did end up meeting the Tsar and Tsarina, Alexandra, the Tsarina. And through his friendship, he began to amaze them. You see, Tsarina Alexandra carried a gene, the gene for hemophilia. That's the bleeding disease, where if you get cut, you can bleed to death. And she passed that hemophilia on to her son, Alexei. Rasputin quickly began to be relied upon by Tsarina Alexandra as the only one that could cure her son's many bleeding episodes. Rasputin would arrive, spit, and the bleeding would stop. Rasputin hung out at court for almost a year, and then he came back home to his wife and his family in Siberia, only to receive a telegram a year later from a distressed Tsarina claiming that her son was likely to die. He'd suffered a hematoma, that's a huge bruise, from a challenging carriage ride. And the internal bleeding was so bad, doctors feared for his survival. Rasputin wrote back, "Never fear. I've taken it to the Lord in prayer, and you have nothing to worry about. The young boy will survive." The next day, he did add, keep the doctors away from him. The next day, much to the amazement of the doctors, young Alexei did survive. In fact, the doctors called his recovery nothing short of the miraculous. Rasputin was invited back to court, and over the next 10 years, he became the darling of Alexandria at the court. He was given an official position by the Tsar, the official candle lighter, and it was his job to travel all over the royal palace, delivering and lighting the candles in front of all the icons and religious figurines that litter the Eastern Orthodox Christianity. Rasputin was often accused of these sexual improprieties and peccadillos. He was even accused of rape by one of her governesses, but that governess was then later discovered in bed with a Cossack soldier, and her claims were dismissed, and she was given the boot. Rasputin continued to be a thriving agent at court, and when the Tsar was taken to World War I, things really got powerful for him, and he began to advise the Tsarina on her every move. And this brought many, many political enemies crawling out of the woodwork. While the majority of the people saw him as a pious and holy man, a monk, others saw him as a mystic, a fraud, a charlatan, or worse, in cahoots with dark forces. Rasputin maintained the friendship of the Tsarina, while the others at court began to connive and plan and plot his assassination. He went home in 1915 and he was stabbed in the stomach by a peasant woman who had been associated with a conservative group. But after surgery, he fully recovered and he went back to court. He even made a startling prediction. He said, if you assassinate me, the royal family will die within 2 years. Yet, that's exactly what happened. Rasputin was found floating in the river with 3 gunshot wounds. No one knows exactly what happened, but a young prince had invited Rasputin to his home. The most commonly accepted version of events is the one that was told by the prince, that he invited Rasputin into his basement, where he fed him tea cakes that were poisoned with cyanide. After eating 3 of them and apparently being immune to the poison, he asked for Madeira wine, which he was given, and after drinking 3 glasses of the Madeira wine, the prince was astonished because it was poisoned too. Afterwards, the prince went upstairs to one of his confidants and borrowed one of their pistols, went downstairs, and shot Rasputin 3 times. The prince dressed up in his clothes and took a carriage home, and then later his body was dumped into the river. Strangely, less than 6 months later, on July 17th, 1918, the Tsar and Tsarina and their children were executed at the hands of the Bolsheviks. There is an alternative theory, however. You see, this happened during the height of World War I, where the Germans were fighting a war on 2 fronts, the Russian front and the Western front, against the rest of the Allies in Great Britain. And the alternative story goes that British intelligence agents were responsible for the assassination of Rasputin. It's claimed that Rasputin was suing the Tsar for peace with the Germans. And making peace with the Germans would close the war on two fronts into a war on only one. And if Germany could focus its war efforts against Great Britain alone and her allies, the outcome of World War I may have been completely different. Is that what happened? The reports are that a British agent is the one who actually pulled the trigger. One would think that records of this would exist in the British archives, yet none have been found to this day. Gregory Rasputin, saint, monk, charlatan, in league with dark powers. Murdered by the prince or by British intelligence? Which one? Leave your thoughts in the comments section below, and as always, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss another exciting video of Tales of the Unusual. As always, until we meet again.